Let's start with a prayer. God dwells in you. Holy God, you wire us for relationship. Your dream for us is relationship, and we enter into relationships of all sorts. Some are incredibly satisfying, some can be destructive, some are notable by their absence, and we feel the loneliness. Almost every relationship we have has its seasons, it has its times of challenge. And in the midst of all of it, you are with us, loving us, and trying to show us how to love each other. Be present with us in all of our relationships. Help us find your power of love and healing. Help us invite you into these thin spaces where your love can break through. And we thank you for the gift of all those who can help us navigate these waters, especially in this day. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So as I said a few minutes ago, my name is Mike Kinman. I am the rector here at All Saints Church. My pronouns are he, him. It is fantastic to have you here. Welcome to Sunday morning at All Saints online. Welcome to everyone joining us on Zoom. Welcome to everyone joining us on Facebook Live. Please share this on your social media platforms so more and more people can join us. This morning's Rector's Forum, we're really thrilled to have some wonderful guests to talk about relationships during COVID-19. I'm particularly grateful for Sally Howard for putting this together, and she'll be a part of who we have with us. And right now, I just want to start off by introducing you to our panelists, and grateful for our guest this morning. First is Dr. Claudia Owens-Shields. Dr. Shields is an associate professor of psychology at the LA campus of the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. As an actively anti-racist womanist, LGBTQ+ affirmative licensed psychologist, she teaches future psychologists to recognize and help patients overcome the impact of often invisible oppressive societal factors, such as systemic discrimination. She brings this expertise into her private clinical practice, works with individuals and family systems, helps them overcome related depression, anxiety, and suicidality. She helps individuals and families cope with grief, loss, and internal crises like those many are now facing during this current pandemic. So Claudia, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Reverend Peter Huang was born in Taiwan to parents of Taiwanese and Japanese heritage and grew up in the international expat communities in Asia before immigrating to the US with his family as a teenager. Ethnic and cultural identity has very much been a ministry and research interest, as well as the focus of his therapy work. He is co-vocational. He's a marriage and family therapist, providing psychotherapy in private practice in Pasadena. And as an Episcopal priest, he serves as missioner for the Asian American ministries of the Diocese of Los Angeles, seeking to grow ministries to Asian Pacific Americans and to encourage a multicultural expression of the church. And so thank you very much to Peter for being here.
Good to be here.
And you bet. And the Reverend Dr. Sally Howard, I think most of you know, she is our Associate Rector for Pastoral Care, Healing, and Health and Spiritual Growth. She is a clinical psychologist with a doctorate in contemporary psychoanalysis. She is also a supervising and training analyst at the Institute of Contemporary Psychoanalysis in LA. Her work has focused on healing in relationships, attachment systems, and recovery from trauma. She is published in the areas of couples therapy, recovering from dehumanizing trauma, and the application of attachment systems and contemplative spirituality to the development of peace. As a priest, she loves the challenge of integrating contemplative practice and God's healing presence with contemporary human development to foster our growth into healthy and holy people, prepared to be agents of God's healing and justice in the world. Sally and Peter and Claudia, thank you so much for being a part of this today. And really just want to start off, if each of you could take a minute, and Claudia, we'll go ahead and start with you and just say, how has the coronavirus impacted you personally?
Well, first I want to say I have a little bit of maybe survivor guilt. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I would say that the impact hasn't been huge for me, and I think that frees me up to be available to be of service to others. I'm able to still continue my work. I work as an associate professor, and we easily shifted to an online platform. I'm sheltering in place with loved ones that I actually get along with pretty well. So very fortunate. However, I do feel the heaviness. Um, Sometimes I feel a sense of not being able to fix things. You know, as a psychologist, I like to come in and fix things and make people feel better. And being limited in how much I can do that means I have to kind of sit with that and let that be and trust. And that's certainly a challenge. One of the things I also find, and I'm reading this on Facebook, that a lot of people are finding that they're maybe not as productive as they normally are, or not able to focus, or they watch a lot more news than maybe they intend to. And so I just kind of want to say that I'm experiencing that, and that that's a normal thing. Sleeping more sometimes because it's exhausting to be part of a global crisis. It weighs on you, you feel it. So I guess I just want folks to understand that all of that is normal. And even those of us who are, you know, in mental health professions, people might think we have it all figured out. We all feel this. We're all in this together.
Yeah. Thanks, Claudia. Peter.
Yeah, like Claudia, a lot of the work has shifted to being at home. And so I do feel fortunate that the impact has not been great in that way. But there's just a lot of adaptation to this new normal, and a lot of letting go of what I'm used to, what we're used to here at home, and a lot of conversations about changes and time for self-care, and those are the things that I'm working on at home. There's a lot of sadness. I do feel that heaviness as well. There's a lot of sadness around me with colleagues and friends, whether it's with their work or with their health. And so I think part of it is being empathetic, yet also knowing what the limits of that are. I do find myself feeling more tired by the end of the day for the same amount of work. And so so that's definitely going on. I miss my friends and relationships, you know, that last month I was supposed to travel to Asia to visit my parents, and I don't get to see them that often, and that trip was canceled, and I just can't wait until the time to be able to see people face to face and spend time with them.
Great. Thanks, Peter. I'm feeling a lot of these same things. Sally, how's this affected you?
Yeah, you know, like I think both Peter and Claudia, you know, I miss being with people. I get a lot of energy out of being in the same room with people. And so it's an adjustment to switch to Zoom. It's also had interesting opportunities. And, you know, I'm grateful we are all healthy in our family. It's a challenge sometimes to work in the same space, you know, because my husband was a widower when we married. We've always had kids with us. So last spring and this fall were the first times we were, you know, a couple, you know, alone. And it seems like just as we got that rhythm kind of into place, our daughter is back, which is wonderful. But, you know, carrying some sadness also with her in her disruption of this, you know, first year in college in which she was, you know, thriving. And so, you know, and I too experienced that there's a lot more thought and intention that has to go into things than there used to be. And so that's tiring sometimes, and carrying some losses and sadness also.
Sally, I want to go ahead and let's just go ahead and stay on Sally right now.
Okay.
And just to start off with just sort of a question, as the world is in crisis right now, Are there ways of understanding this crisis and the impact it is having on us psychologically as individuals, on our relationships, and on our systems of interactions with our loved ones?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I first wanted to say that we really developed this forum out of what, we were experiencing, but also what we were hearing from people in our community. And, there was one statement from one of our parents that really got me thinking about, some of the challenges in this situation. And I'd like to read part of it. She said, "I'm struggling right now. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure that's true. To let go of former family rules, expectations, ideas, and culture that we created and turned into our routine. Pre-corona, we had clear and safe borders to roam freely within as a family, and it took years to build and strengthen those. And many of those fit more loosely, but some of them don't exist at all any longer. We feel unsafe in the outside, and inside is difficult too. So we are redefining what it means to live and raise children. And, it just, I think that expresses so well some of the challenges that are present for us at this point. And it also points to something else about us that is so true, I think, to who we are, that as human beings, we have this exquisite capacity to develop ways of feeling emotionally okay in our worlds, both by things we do ourselves that are soothing or energizing, and those we do with others, ways of feeling good in ourselves or good enough and in our experiences. And at best, those patterns keep us neither underwhelmed or overwhelmed, and we can flexibly go back and forth between things we do ourselves and things we can have in being with others. And it's kind of a good enough, not perfect, but good enough pattern. And, our brains are doing that even before we're born. Babies are putting together things so that, at birth, they already recognize parents' voices, and, within 6 hours, they prefer parents' faces over all other faces. I mean, we are really, amazingly and wonderfully made. And so those patterns that start in infancy about how we do things with others and how we feel good and connected and what comforts us and interests us is already present. Yeah. So we develop those rhythms or that culture, that the parent was talking about, ways of being together, ways of being apart, that keep us feeling okay and balanced. And, part of couplehood is bringing those things together.
Right.
And it takes a lot of work. Those of us who are partnered know. I was thinking about my husband and I, our routine in the morning to make breakfast, who stands where on the counter, and then we sit down together, and which part of the paper we, a rhythm of conversation and quiet, those kinds of things that just become a background comfort and familiarity. So, we do that. And then we, if we have kids, we bring that together, with kids. And if it's working well enough, then everybody's needs are, taken care of well enough. But, a crisis like this disrupts all of that. Yeah. So everybody's rhythms, right? And patterns and their kind of self-regulation, is completely disturbed and disrupted. The ways that we get motivated or feel balanced or being together gets totally whacked. And that really puts our ability, to have just a basic sense of emotional regulation, on major strain. And it's really hard for couples and families. And, we can't get to the things we normally would to support ourselves or enjoy ourselves necessarily. And we, lose a sense of control.
And so like one of the most important things about this to realize is this is a disruption. We might be thinking, well, you know what, I've been in this relationship. I've been, with this family or with this person or with these people. And it's been fine. And all of a sudden it's so much harder. Well, part of my brain may be thinking, well, we're all still the same people. And yet it's not. This is a major disruption that's happening. And of course, this is going to be harder for the same reason. I want to sort of shift to Peter. Peter, you talked about how at the end of the day, you feel more tired, even though you've done the same amount of work as you usually do. This is, these systems of interaction are used to getting us through times that are very different from this, but now this is a very different time. And so how are you looking at this psychologically in terms of us as individuals and in terms of relationships?
Sure. Yeah. I think I first think of it as how we handle crisis in the space of time. Usually we're thinking, okay, this is a critical time, and even at the beginning of this, it's 2 weeks. I think most of us are thinking, okay, let's just get through this. We'll make these adjustments for 2 weeks, and then we quickly shift to our, either it's flight or fight or freeze or, however else, we can be. And then it sets in. I think we're looking at a situation that's more similar to long-term care and long-term crisis. So just even flattening the curve, we're extending the time that we're going to be dealing with this, and it's now no longer 2 weeks. It's really 8 to 10 or a quarter of the year, or even when we come back to normal or whatever normal might be at that point, right? And so I think part of it is even understanding how we respond to crisis and having that longer term perspective. Space has changed a lot too. I think, like Sally was mentioning with regulation, the usual places that we have to regulate. All of a sudden our living spaces become very simplified and intense. And so everything gets brought into the forefront at home. And I don't even assume that people are necessarily emotionally or physically safe at home. And so those issues really get brought to the forefront. How does an extrovert or introvert deal with that? What are some cultural assumptions that come into play? Expectations, all of that. I think one of the things that I think about a lot is just how we deal with loss in crisis. I think we're in this society, we're socialized towards success. And so success and how we value our accomplishments. And this is a challenging time for people who are oriented that way, because that not having be able to do things in an usual way feels like failure sometimes. And that taps into our deep sense of shame. But how do we talk about and engage loss and accept that, and then together find solidarity, together find our connectedness? I think that's one of the ways that we can understand this crisis, and how do we respond in the midst of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, grief is huge that we're experiencing right now. I want to turn to Claudia. Claudia, you said something about that you happen to be safe, at home with people that you actually enjoy being with. And yet a couple of things with that. First of all, sometimes we can be at home with people we actually enjoy being with, and we're still finding new challenges in being together. And then we have these relationships where maybe we don't live in the same place, but they're still deeply important relationships. And now we can't see each other. We can't touch each other. We can't do these things. So how are you looking at all this?
There's a model that I really like for understanding crises.
Hmm.
So I think I'll answer that question if I can by just
Hmm.
talking a little bit about this model.
Go
It was
for it.
developed by a psychologist named Gerald Kaplan, and his whole thing was prevention. And what he wanted to do was look at times when people went through difficult periods in their life and prevent them from moving to what he called a lower level of equilibrium. In other words, they functioned worse permanently as a result of having gone through a crisis. And he wanted to help people understand that managed properly, you could actually take a crisis and leverage it toward growth. You could actually make yourself better as a result. And a lot of his work really kind of centers around relationships. So I'll take a minute to kind of talk about that. He identified 3 different types of crises, and they all apply to COVID-19. The first is threat to bodily integrity. Like, are you going to get sick or are you going to be injured? And many of us have either experienced something like that or know someone who has, or we're afraid that that will happen to us. And so that fear sets us up for emotional angst, more anxiety, depression, and those kinds of things. Another one is loss of role mastery. So do you feel good about your ability to manage your role, whether it's a parent or a spouse or whatever your profession is? All of those roles are challenged right now. If your relationship or your role in a relationship is that of the provider and you now can't because you can't go to work, or you're the one who manages things around the house and there's more people in the house and you can't eat out now, so you're cooking all the time, whatever it is, all those roles are challenged. Your sense, if you get your sense of self and your sense of importance from being able to do those things and you now can't, then you can start to feel bad about yourself. And then the other one, and this gets right to what you were talking about, Mike, when you mentioned sometimes we can't be as close physically to the people that we love. And so that's the third type of crisis, which is loss of nurturance. And that can be just that you can't spend time with the person, you can't hug them. Maybe you're Zooming or Skyping, but you can't give them a hug. And that can present itself as loss of nurturance. Or we are seeing, and I know now actually 4 people that have lost loved ones to the coronavirus. And so deep sense of loss. And so the task then becomes to move toward acceptance, to sit with it, to realize that in a time of crisis like this, there's really a lot that we don't know. Sometimes we get a sense of control by predicting what's going to happen. We don't know this virus. Yeah. We don't know when things are going to return back to normal. And so that moves us all to a place, or can move us all to either a place of tremendous angst and worry, or it can move us toward a place of faith and sitting quietly, taking one moment at a time and allowing things to be. And to do that with the person that you're sitting next to, or you're Skyping with, or you're on the phone with, you say, we're just going to sit in this thing together. We don't know where this is going to take us. Yeah. We're going to sit in it. And we're going to recognize that we have within us the strength that I believe is placed in every human being that comes from God. We're going to sit in it, and we're going to trust that strength, and that will rise up, and that we will face one moment at a time, whatever it is that we need to face.
That's wonderful. And it cuts to such the heart of who we are as an All Saints community, is we're that community that is just, we're sitting with each other, and we're sitting together even when we can't be together. And we can be that container that's strong enough to hold the anxiety, that's strong enough to hold the anger and the pain and the grief. And we sit in that space together. And it's a hard place to be, and we have the tools to do it. We're getting some questions coming on the chat. I encourage you also to use the Q&A feature, and we'll get to those in a little bit. Right now, I just want to get completely practical in terms of sort of nuts and bolts of what we're doing, which is what are some tools for our toolkit here? What are some things that we can do to cope as individuals and in our relationships with our families and loved ones? Peter, I want to sort of start with you. What are some good things to remember? Just what can we do that might help?
Yeah. And I think we probably have all heard this already, just to be kind to ourselves. And how do we not expect to be 100% in everything that we do, and invite that grace and invite that compassion for ourselves, and not to be consumed by failing or the not doing or the losses, to have that space, whether on our own or mirroring that for each other. Sometimes, like Mike, like you said, sitting with each other is just finding that space to hold and to have with each other. How do we foster empathy? And empathy doesn't always mean just the challenging feelings. Like I remember in Lent, you quoted from Rainer Maria Wilke, and this part about no feeling is final. And I think about that, and I think no feeling is final doesn't mean that we dismiss the feelings.
Right.
We actually embrace it.
We hold it.
Yeah, we hold it, and then we looked together in the midst of holding that together. I think as a faith community, it's important to invite God and the roominess of God into our midst, that God holds us, God loves us, and it's the hold my hand part of that poem. We are holding each other's hands. So how do we invite emotionally generous people into our lives and be that for each other? I think those are things that we, as a doing society, we don't often take on or readily assume. And sometimes even in confined spaces like our homes in this time, we will then find more things to do.
Right.
But finding that space to connect and to even understand, how we each are processing through this or experiencing this, whether it's with our partners or with our children. I think just having that space and being intentional about creating that space and not filling our spaces with more things to do. Those are the things that I would start with. There are more.
Well, and we have people who are trying to, and we've been using the phrase work from home, but really what they're trying to do is live at home in a very complex situation and still trying to work, with even more work doing that. Work may have been added to with having to homeschool or do different things. And then I also think about sort of the whole idea of space is we have those among us who have more space than we can deal with because we're feeling so lonely. And then we have others of us who are like, oh my gosh, I'm living with people and we're right on top of each other 24/7. I can't get any space. So Claudia, I want to pitch it back to you and sort of like, what sort of practical things, what tools are in your toolkit for all this?
So actually I invite folks to create their own toolkit. And again, it's based on the same model from Gerald Kaplan. And he has us look at ways that we've coped with things in the past. And one of the things that'll lead a person to crisis is if they go and do all the things that worked before, and those things either don't work anymore and they still feel horrible, or those things are not available. Like, maybe you go and get a hug, or you go sit in your friend's living room, and now you can't do those things. So what that then does is it means that we have to develop new ways of coping. And so what I encourage folks to do is to literally take a piece of paper. You can do this now at home if you want to, but literally take a sheet of paper and fold it in half so that now you have two columns, right? And one of the columns you can put the heading more growth producing. And then on the other column, you can put less growth producing.
Okay.
And you can think of things that maybe you've done that have helped you cope. And you can decide what those things are, which column they fit into, right? So I think about all the trips that I've made to the refrigerator. Is that growth producing in the way that I want it to be? depending on what I get out of that refrigerator. Or are people exercising? That's one of the things that is harder to do when you're inside, but something that's very helpful for our mood and our anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So if one of the things you would normally do that's growth producing is go to the gym, and you can't do that, you think, well, maybe I can't exercise. But can you go online and find a dance video and move, right? And so that might be something that you can put in the growth producing column. So anyway, what I encourage folks to do is think about everything they can think of, all the ways of coping that produce growth that have worked, and maybe some that they've heard of that they haven't tried, or that they think about that they'd like to try. And then in the other column, some things that maybe they've done that maybe they think, maybe drinking all of this or smoking all of this, or, hasn't produced what I wanted. And so you put that in those columns.
Yeah.
And then what I encourage people to do is literally draw lines through the things that they've tried that haven't worked, or that are not working during this current crisis. And try to identify new things. And maybe we can even use the chat feature, or folks can communicate by phone after this and compare notes. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? So that everybody comes up with their own toolkit based on what works. Because I could throw out a bunch of advice and folks might be, well, I've tried that and it didn't work.
Right.
So I encourage people to kind of come up with their own ways of producing. And some of that's going to depend on the kind of crisis that you're experiencing, right? So if you're feeling a loss of role mastery because you can't do your work, and that's where you've drawn your sense of self, what are some other ways that you can really start to tap into who you really are? I think sometimes we miss our natural, wonderful, divine beauty because we lie to ourselves and we think that comes from what we do. And so this can be an opportunity to really stop and recognize that, you're an awesome, divine person just sitting on your couch. And can you sit with that and allow that to come in? And what if you can't, what gets in the way of that, right? Sitting on your couch and realizing that you're awesome, right?
But what I love about that is it's a reminder that wisdom comes from at least two places. The first is it comes from inside us, that we have wisdom. It's part of believing that God dwells in us, is that we have wisdom. And then the other piece is wisdom resides in the community. And we have the wisdom. We have everything we need to get through this. We need to access it inside ourselves, and the divine inside ourselves, and then the divine inside the community. Thank you so much for that. Sally, go to you sort of briefly before we got a couple questions lining up, but sort of how do you look at this sort of?
Yeah. Well, I would echo really part of what Peter and Claudia have already said. In resiliency studies, we know that movement is one of the strongest ways to move through stress and depression. It actually combats cortisol in the brain. The only thing that does, and maybe meditation, and also just that compassion and empathy. And, in a time like this, remembering that we really are not alone, that God is really with us. We really have an attachment and a secure relatedness that nothing can ever change. And, lastly, I would say, the universe, our best model for understanding it is that it is nonlinear, and that means that at points where there is great opportunity for change, good change also comes with that flux that everybody's feeling, right? That can be disorienting. But systems, right before they change, there's always flux, and we're in that, right? We're in this flux. And so I would encourage and try to remember that myself, to look for the opportunities and look for what God's going to bring out of this. I mean, this is God's specialty, right? Bringing life out of destruction.
That's right.
And so looking for, how is God today, this moment, in our relationship and our family, how is God going to open something up for us? Because I think that's something we can count on.
Yeah, no, I love thinking about that because, I hear the question, I feel them inside myself. Well, when are things going to get back to normal? And what I keep thinking is, let's reach a little higher than that. Normal wasn't that great. There's a lot that can come out of this that can help us build something, and, that God can bring out of this that is so much better for so many more people than it is right now. Couple questions.
Peter, you've got it. Can I say, Peter, you've got a phrase for that. What is
good.
that?
Yeah.
Can you say what that phrase is? I think I'm remembering it. Oh.
I'm drawing a blank right now.
Okay, you know
Well,
what?
if you think
I'll
of
think
it, let
about
us
it
know.
too. I am too. Okay.
So I got a
I'll
couple
come back
questions.
to it.
Yeah, I want a couple questions since we've got a little more time. First is Steve Williams asked, can someone address the current phase that the country is in right now, the rise in anger and civil unrest? Why is there lack of trust in the necessity of the social distancing actions? How vulnerable are we to manipulation to outside factors? Who wants to tackle that?
Well, were you going to go? Go, Peter.
Sally, go ahead. But I'll follow up. Yeah.
All right. I was just going to say that I think, fear, of course, when fear is dominant in a person's system, we tend to act out of, not our higher levels, but, our more, self-protective, even if that self-protection, in this case, it's odd, right? Because but also identity, our identities are so important to us. And when we're afraid, it makes it even harder to move into identity that is generous and inclusive. I think we can all get stuck in, self-protective and destructive self-protective strategies.
I guess one of the things that makes me think of is what makes us feel powerful. And when we're in a position of fear, we feel sometimes powerless. And so I'm looking at the people who are gathering, in these groups on the steps of Capitol buildings, protesting these things. And what I'm getting from them is, oh, wow, this is how they're trying to feel powerful, and because that place that Claudia, that you were calling us into, of can we just sit in this space? That's really, really hard. And so I think you're right, we're in this fear place. And we need, that's when we need to find ways to come together in healthy ways. But whenever we're in a fear place, we are vulnerable to manipulation because we want to get out of that place. So how do we not let people manipulate us through fear for their own political and economic ends or other ends? But how can we, use the power of what does it mean to really love each other and love ourselves to find that strength in love? Claudia, it looks like you want to say something.
I was thinking about Gandhi, be the change you want to see.
Yeah.
So I think, how do we be that change in this moment? And I think one of the ways we can do that is we can recognize that a lot of the structures and systems that we've put our faith in have let us down. Mm-hmm. Right. And I could, any of us can list them. Right. But so it can feel very much like all of the things that we have counted on for a sense of safety and comfort are gone. Right. So now what do we do? How do we manage that?
Right.
And again, I think it's something that our society has not been so good at. We haven't been challenged in ways that other societies have been challenged for hundreds of years, where there's war on your soil all the time, right? I think folks that live in that place have a sense of strength that we as a society now have the opportunity to develop in ways that we haven't. And some of that is saying, okay, we're going to sit with this uncertainty, right? Sit in it. We're going to cry. We're going to be afraid, but we're going to sit in it and we're going to allow it to change us. And it's the simplest thing, and yet it's the hardest thing to do, right?
Yeah.
But not easy. And I think that's really facing that challenge. And I think as we do that, little by little, we can change the immediate world around us. And maybe this is a little contagious. That's sort of my thought on that.
We've been getting a couple questions about the issues of people who live alone. And how do those of us who live alone, cope with this, especially as we're going through grief and we're going through all these other feelings. Any thoughts for those among us who are, really isolated right now?
Let me see if I could speak to that, just because the isolation is real, and it's and even more intensified. And a lot of people are at home being by themselves. And so one of the things we want to tap into is just reconnecting to what our structures or rituals already were prior to this. That there has been already times of isolation or being at home by oneself, but what already had been some of the coping strategies or some of the life-giving places in those times, and how do we adapt, like Claudia was mentioning earlier, just ways of adapting, may be different. It may not be as gratifying, but how do we adapt things that we already are doing or had been doing in new ways? Do we reach out to a friend to have a meal together online? Do we explore music differently, or do we explore traveling differently? Or different ways of connecting that, but a recognition that it's not quite the same. Sometimes surprisingly life-giving. In new ways, but sometimes it's the acknowledgement that there are losses there too, nonetheless.
We're going to need to close out this portion because Keith and some other folks are going to have to get us ready for Children's Chapel at 11 o'clock. Claudia, Sally, and Peter, there are some questions that are popping up in the Q&A and on the chat, and you are actually capable of answering those as panelists. And so if that's something that you all want to just sort of, if people want to just for maybe for the next 10 or 15 minutes, if you're willing to stay on and sort of answer questions just individually in Q&A for people and in the chat, is that okay?
Yes.
Can you all do that?
Yeah.
That'd be great. So first of all, just thank you. I think this is probably something we're going to have to do a couple different times during this. Deeply grateful for you and the resource that you are to this community. And just thank you for your holy presence with us this morning. So thank you to Claudia Owen Shields, Peter Huang, Sally Howard. Thank you all so much.